have to sit down.
Okay, I hereby call this city council meeting July 19th, 2022 to order. Let's stand up and do the flag salute, please. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jen, would you take a roll call?
Counselor Williams.
Here.
Counselor Prophet. Here. Counselor Drago.
Here.
Counselor Pearson. Here. Mayor Keeper.
Here.
And I have Counselor Norton and Counselor Beagle is absent.
Okay, so we have established a quorum. Let's go to the minutes, June 28th, 2022, city council public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes.
Accept the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Anybody would like to have about the minutes? Having hearing none, we'll do a roll call, please.
Counselor Williams.
Yes.
Counselor Prophet.
Yes.
Counselor Drago.
Yes.
Counselor Pearson.
Yes.
Mayor Keeper.
Yes. We'll move on to the public comment. This is an invitation for public comment. Interest audience are invited to provide comments. This time, is wishing to address the council on matters not on the agenda. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter of litigation, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing at some future date. The mayor may limit comments to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. Please complete a request to speak card prior to the meeting and turn it in to the city recorder. Speakers may not yield their time to others. If written materials is included, 15 copies of all information to be distributed to the council should be submitted to the recorder or the city manager prior to the meeting. Action will not be taken at this meeting on citizen comments. The council, however, after hearing from interested citizens, may place items under new business on a future agenda, so proper notice may be given to all interested parties. We'll go to the first one, which is,
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. As you may have heard, Morrow County Health District is actively pursuing, trying to block Boardman Fire, Boardman PD from responding to medical aids within our jurisdiction. This poses a high risk for our community's health and safety. The reason why I came here this evening was to thank Mr. Mayor Keeper for standing up on our behalf of our entire community. The Boardman PD, the city of Boardman, the Boardman Fire, he recognizes that this is going to be a life safety issue, and he's advocating strongly on all of our behalf. So the reason why I'm here tonight is to thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
you bet. Jonathan Tallman.
Thank you. I appreciate your guys' time. You know what, I would just like to add to my Q's thing, and I would personally thank you, Mr. Keeper. My dad was suffering from not being able to breathe today, okay? And there was a step up of getting his breath and shortness of breath. And because of what he's talking about, and I can look at a specific example, my dad no longer has shortness of breath to bridge that gap. I am very thankful for that aspect of it, and I can go into specific of it, and I will for doing the right thing and how it goes on specifically. I just ask that we work together, okay? One of the ways that we work together is showing integrity, okay? Right now, we have a council member that lives in Pendleton, okay? That still owns a house here, that is not here. We need to step up and say, are they living in Boardman or are they living in Pendleton? I brought this up at the appeal that I brought up. Nothing has been done. It needs to be addressed. It is a concern. We're expecting people to have integrity, our own spouses to have integrity, but it's time that they step up and say, you know what? I need to make sure that I'm living by integrity myself. And I really feel like that ball's being dropped. Another issue is I can no longer see the video calls, and I would like to know about the videos of our Boardman City Council meetings, the integrity of saying, hey, we had it work within 24 hours, which was great, of the video conferencing the next day of all our meetings. Now, it's months, and I really want to scrutinize, because it seemed to happen at the same time where I started calling people out on their specifics of their behavior. And then now all of a sudden, oh no, it doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's just a technical error, but you know what? Let's have some integrity and step up and do the right thing. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, that takes care of our public comment. We're gonna go down to the action items, and before we go to the action items, we'll read something. I put something together, and I'm addressing the citizens of Boardman. I'd like to publicly come out and address the citizens of Boardman. On July 12th, your city council was given the directive to decide whether or not Police Chief Rick Stocco was to become the internal candidate chosen by the city council for the opportunity to replace City Manager Karen Pettigrew due to her retirement. The council in open session used the word process 34 times. Your mayor used it 3 times. This council became concerned that a process was not being followed for some reason, when in fact the city manager and assistant city manager followed to the T a correct and ethical process in choosing an internal candidate. Number 1, Karen came to the council with a plan to hire through for candidates to become the city manager to be trained under here for the potential opportunity to become city manager upon approval of the council. Second, no council or no candidates were chosen. Third, Rick Stocco was approached to become the internal candidate. 4, Rick Stocco approached every councilor about their feelings, and each and every one of us gave our approval of that was probably going to be the right thing to do. 5th, Rick Stocco started working on being trained under the direction of current city manager Karen Pettigrew. 6, the council was concerned about the police department. Chief Stocco, from the time he became chief, worked on building staff for internal advancement and assured the council that the Boardman Police Department would not suffer if he was chosen as the internal candidate. It was agreed by this council that we would meet in July and decide whether Rick Stocco should be an internal candidate. On July 12th, we met and attacked and questioned the integrity of the process that we all followed and agreed to. We questioned the transparency of our city manager and assistant city manager / police chief in open session. How dare we? How dare we? These processes, concerns allowed us to forget what I just mentioned in those 6 bullets. Karen Pettigrew and Chief Stocco did everything we as a council allowed. For us to make the abrupt decision was inappropriate and rude to our staff in this fall. Karen Pettigrew and Rick Stokoe have done nothing wrong and are not unethical and or shady. We, as a council, allowed this to happen. If there were concerns, no one sure approached it to City Manager Pettigrew or myself. If there were concerns that the internal candidate process was not appropriate, no concerns were shared with City Manager Karen Pettigrew. Karen asked, should Rick Stokoe apply for this position last week? The answer that was given is it's not going to be unanimous. Wednesday, July the 13th, I get a phone call that Rick Stokoe announced that he will continue to be the assistant city manager until January 2023, because that was the commitment that he gave, but would no longer be interested in becoming the internal candidate for the Boardman city manager position. Karen, Rick, I, as your mayor of Boardman, state you two have the highest integrity, the highest love for Boardman. You two have not been unethical, shady, or deceitful in this process. We will now move to the action items, procedure to hire the city manager.
May I speak, please?
You
Mayor?
have the floor.
We have invited Ms. Sharon Harris from CIS to join us this evening. I would like for her to give us some input that further supports the data that I presented at our meeting last week to provide tools to guide us through a process of hiring a city manager. I would also like to reiterate that the city council is responsible for hiring our city manager, and it is on us to do so in the proper procedures. By bringing up the points that I did last week, it had nothing to do with anyone on a personal level. And any concerns that are out there within our community regarding anyone's integrity or credibility here in our community, with our staff, with our police department, are unacceptable. If that was perceived that way, that is beyond my control and anyone else's, then I will state clearly that as a citizen and a member of this community, as an unpaid volunteer who spends a ton of time on this council, I support this community and our staff 100%. And every one of you that are in the room that have joined us in person. And never, ever would I stand for anybody to disparage Chief Stokoe or Karen Pettigrew. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Ms. Harris so she can just give us some unbiased third-party input on processes that we may be following, and or there may be some opportunity for us to do things better.
Okay, the mayor of Boardman will give Sharon Harris the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I guess I should say thank you for inviting me, but I'm not exactly sure what clarification you want me to give. I will give just some best practice advice. I have spoken with Counselor, and I have also spoken with your chief and with your current city manager. And like many processes, you know, it's a collaborative process, and we might have stops and starts as we go. The first thing I want to clarify is I, as a consultant with CIS, am not giving legal advice. I'm not an attorney, and this is not legal advice. You, the City of Boardman City Council, have a city attorney, and your city attorney should be giving you legal advice as far as
any questions about procedure that you do with a city manager recruitment, such as when to be in executive session, when to be in public session, etc. So I am not giving legal advice, and I want to make sure that is very clear. When I got involved, CIS does often help members with various types of recruitments, city manager recruitments, department head recruitments. Recruiting is a big thing. Our entities want to do it right, especially when we're doing a city manager recruitment. You know, it's one of the most important decisions that a city council has the privilege of making, the hiring of a city manager. And I can tell by some of the calls that I have had over the last couple of weeks with counselor and with city manager and with your chief, that there's a lot of passion in this process, as it should. So I think some of the confusion or some of the conversations I've had with many of you actually shows the passion for your community. And that is a good thing. That is a good thing. So best practices for hiring a city manager can vary. First and foremost, like I say, it's the will of the council for their process in hiring a city manager, okay? And so when you do a process, there's various tools that you can use. We always like to start with a clean job description, so we all know going forward, has anything changed in the duties? Is there things in the job description that wasn't there that we want there, et cetera? So starting with a clean job description, so whoever the applicant is, whoever your final candidate is, they have a good tool that says, this is what I'm getting into. This is what I want to get into, right? And that the city council, you know, there's many bosses there that we're all somewhere reading from the same book. So I always like to see a clean job description going forward. So I have no idea when's the last time y'all looked at your job description, but that's something that I always communicate is how we start. Then we like to take a look at the process. What is your process going to be? What does the council come together to decide what is our process going to be? For this particular scenario, my understanding through various conversation is that you actually had a process that started months and months ago with hiring a third party to help you with the recruitment. So you did that process back, I believe in January, or I don't know if I have the month right, where you actually hired that third party to help you in your city manager search. So you were on board with your process. Not unlike other entities, oftentimes we don't find what we're looking for. The right person has not come forward. So my understanding is that at that time you shifted gears and said, let's look at then a different way of getting to our city manager process, getting through the process. So my understanding is that you created an assistant city manager position with the intent that this person would be somewhat in training under your current city manager. And at the end of this training period or this review period, you would then come to the conclusion that says we're at the time period as a city council and the internal candidate, you know, let's have a discussion, let's have a quote unquote interview to see if we're all still on the same page. That is not unusual to do. There are different ways of getting to the selection of our city manager. The biggest thing we need to remember is, did we set a process and did we work our process? Okay. Even though there were bumps in the road, it sounded like you set a process, you didn't find what you looked for, so you went to a second process. All very fine. When we do a city manager or any public employee recruitment process, if we go out to the public and do a full-fledged recruitment, if we're doing an internal recruitment, any type of a recruitment process you are doing, you are required by law. So here's where the law comes into the motion of recruitment and interviewing, okay? The Oregon law says, public entity, you must give preference to a qualified veteran. If a veteran applies for your position, they get preference. They either get 5 points for being a qualified veteran or 10 points for being a qualified disabled veteran. So in whatever process you're doing, whether it's an external recruitment, an internal recruitment, a combined internal or external recruitment, if an applicant in that pool that meets the minimum qualifications, you give preference. So where I see your process today is you have an internal applicant. And so a question is, internal applicant, are you a veteran? My understanding, your internal applicant is a veteran. So your internal applicant would get veterans preference. So what that means is, let's say you had 2 equal candidates, okay? One is a veteran, one is not a veteran. The law requires you to give the position to the person who is a veteran. There's the preference. So let's just say you went out and did a full-blown recruitment process, and your internal applicant applied with those external candidates. Your internal applicant, who is a veteran, would give preference at every stage of the recruitment process, okay? So that is the legal component under doing a recruitment, is the veteran preference, okay? The rest of your process is really up to you. There is not a legal requirement for how you do your process as far as what questions you ask. Now, there's some questions you can't ask. There's some illegal questions that you cannot ask, right? But as far as, do you have 3 panels, 2 panels, 1 panel? That is something that you, the city council, makes a decision on. The only other way the legal process comes into play again is going to be when you, the city council, go to make a decision. What part of the decision of the discussion sits in an executive session, and what part of that decision and discussion comes into a public session, okay? So there's your 2 components as far as where the legalities hit a public process of recruitment, and for the city council, the public process of recruitment for a city manager. So let's go back to the process of what happened back in January. So when I spoke to Councilor Pearson, and I also spoke to your city manager and your chief, my questions were, what was the pleasure of the council, the decisions of the council back in January? There had to be minutes from that city council meeting, right? Something had to happen. So there must be minutes. And so what did the minutes say? What was our direction? Do we remember what our direction is? Pull up the minutes. And if in those minutes you found where your direction was, then have you been following your direction? It sounds like, from what I just heard the mayor say, you put a process together back in January, and you've been working that process. So I think it's a valid process because you decided it and you worked it. Now you are at the end of your process, and the council comes together and says, we've worked our process. Are we entering the next phase of the process, which would be, is our internal applicant, along with the city council, are we still moving forward? What does that look like? Okay. So, you know, process for, like I say, there's so many different ways of doing this. The most important is, as a collective body, what have you agreed to and have you followed it? Because the last thing, especially an internal candidate wants, is to be thrown a monkey wrench with, I thought we agreed on X, now all of a sudden we're doing Y, that is pause for, you know, what happened? When did this happen? When did this change? So Counselor Pearson, I had given her some tools because they were asked for, and they are tools that we use, such as there's a guide that League of Oregon Cities puts out about how to hire a city administrator. I think even your city manager has a copy of that. You know, making sure you have a clean application, making sure you have veterans preference application with your application, making, you know, different guidelines on how to do a recruitment process, how to ask questions, what questions you might ask a city manager in a recruitment process. So those were all just very best practice basic tools that I share with all entities that ask me about how do we go about doing a process. In no way was my tools that I share a direction that said you had to do this. This is up to you, the city council, on your process. You are the elected body. This is your hire. You decide what that process is going to be. So with that, Councilor Pearson, did I answer your questions? Mayor, did I answer your questions? I'm not sure what else I have to add other than clear communication about our steps. You know, sometimes we have to revisit our clear communication. Maybe we don't all remember what happened back in January. Maybe somebody missed the meeting, right? So going back and looking at our minutes is really a key to, are we on target and how do we move forward? So I probably took a little bit more time, but.
Thank you, Sharon. For the council, counselors, are there anybody has any questions that they would like to have asked this time?
I have a few.
Yes.
If I could ask you, Sharon, were we required to open up the job after Prothman? Okay, I don't know that I understand completely, and so I don't want to be relying on my memory. It's a weak vessel, my memory. But I think that we originally went to Prothman about an assistant city manager. Am I wrong?
That was part of it, to go.
Who's second on?
I said that in the advertisement, it clearly said that you were looking for an assistant manager to train to step up into the city manager's position.
That was.
It was very clear.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Did we open up the position? Do we have to open up the position to all internal candidates, or do we get to select the internal candidate we think that's the most qualified? That's a question for Sharon.
Okay, thank you. So again, we go back to what was our initial intent? What was our direction? And when I heard the city manager, what I heard Karen just say is the council agreed, and if I'm misinterpreting this, Karen, tell me that I misinterpreted. My understanding is you hired a third party to hire an assistant city manager to be in training. So it was a new position. The intent of the position was to train under the current city manager, okay? And so that was the recruitment. So if that's the way the recruitment, then the intent was, we're going to do this internal recruitment. We're going to select a candidate. We're going to bring somebody into that position with the intent that that person would go into the city manager position. Now, that normally does not guarantee, you know, directly in, because when you hire anyone, it's kind of like, you know, especially someone who is training, is it working, right? Are we on the same page? Is this what the person thought the job would be? Especially when we're talking about a city manager, right? It's like, okay, I'm trying it on. Is this really what I want to do with my career? So I have seen many entities kind of go this path, and then the internal applicant says, you know, I don't really think I'm a right fit. So it's a time for us both, the city council and the internal candidate, to kind of, you know, put the suit on, so to speak. So it sounds like your direction was to hire the internal candidate with the intent that this person would train to be the city manager. That is how I am understanding the posting that Prothman helped you with in January. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so then it looks like what happened is your internal candidate or your candidate for the assistant city manager position ended up being an internal candidate, the police chief, right? So that person became the internal ACM in training. So again, because of the parameters you started with, because of the intent, I think you have worked your process just fine. You followed the intent of your process. I don't see where you have left it or changed it.
May I ask a question? I agree and follow what Sharon's summary was of the position that was in fact posted that way with the intent for the assistant city manager to become and trained as the city manager. Back in November, I had inquired about this, knowing that it's our role to hire a city manager as the city council, and what I asked Sharon, what role, if any, would we have in the process along the way? And because it was an assistant city manager, we were not really involved. We were aware of the job description and what was happening. When we didn't have anybody come on board through the Prothman experience, and Chief stepped up, and we all thought that made sense. And the next question was, for an email that I, after inquiring about the process that we were following, Karen described that we weren't, again, like Sharon says, not guaranteeing this person in the city council would select them as the city manager, and that we might advertise again just to see who's available. My big concern is, not just for the council's sake, but for the entire community, is to make sure that in the end, it's the city council who creates and agrees with the process that we're following, and the end decision is the city council's. When we got to this evaluation period, did we have an opportunity to decide, are we going to interview anyone else? Are we going to put this out for application? Are we good with where we're at? I feel like there was a gap there, and I want to make sure if we weren't supposed to, okay, where was it written, and where in our minutes did we as a council agree to a certain process? Where was our input provided? Because that's our responsibility. Did we drop the ball somewhere? Did we miss something?
I could probably answer that. Last meeting, our direction was to find out whether or not we wanted Chief Stokoe to be our internal candidate, as far as, are we going to give him the support of having that opportunity to do it? It was also my understanding that that would then take us to the next step of whatever we jumped to that step that hadn't been decided. We were at the step where we were to decide whether or not we thought that Chief Stokoe was doing the job, was ready to take on the position, and then I do believe that the council gets to choose who the next city manager is. But he was the man, and that was our job to try to figure out and say, yes, we're going with Chief Stokoe. No, you're not going with Chief Stokoe, and these are the reasons why. And then be able to, as a unit, figure out, are we just going to go with him, or are we going to go to the next step? That was what I felt our direction was, and we didn't do that.
So I feel a bit confused because I didn't come into any of those meetings with that understanding. There was nothing presented to me or written in our agenda that told us or gave us any guidelines or direction for what our process would be, what step we were
Last
in.
meeting. What
Yeah,
meeting?
or any meeting.
So the two
executive sessions we had, you didn't know what the purpose was for those two meetings?
Mr. Mayor, I would caution you not to discuss anything discussed in executive session. Because that has.
So you didn't know what we were,
I know what was labeled as the title of the executive session,
and you didn't know what
which
our
was
purpose
to,
was?
it was to, I'm gonna misquote the words, but I believe that the executive session was called in order for us to evaluate the performance of a city official. I get it wrong, I'm sorry, I'm just not gonna remember exactly, it's not written in front of me. Oh, is it? I'm sorry. On the last page, thank you. To conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. And to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the chief executive officer of any public body, which would have been Karen, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, a public officer, employer, or staff member, sorry.
In an open session, we didn't, we came out with a no vote.
You know, I would have, just full disclosure, I come from a compliance background and I'm a natural rule follower. So I'm used to having everything outlined. Here's the process. I've worked for corporate America and I'm used to, this is how you interview people and this is the process. I feel like there was some gray area between when we were hiring an assistant city manager, which we had zero input in, to where it transferred to now we're getting to a point where we need to pick the city manager. And I don't feel like I was aware of what our role was or where we were going to be making a decision, what the process was. So if we can look back through our research and our notes and minutes and say, okay, in fact, we have a documented process that was in place, and maybe there was some misunderstanding and miscommunication along the way. Great. If we were on track, great. I'm just, again, trying to get some further clarification that did we in fact follow the proper process that we as a council agreed upon?
Karen Pedro.
So what is your solution if that's not the case? Because I don't want to sit here all night.
I don't want to sit here all night either, Karen. I just also don't want to do this.
So let's just say we didn't follow the process.
And this is where the tools that Sharon has provided and where our city attorney could provide any more input in the League of Oregon Cities document that we sent last week. There's an opportunity for us to discuss those, just like I mentioned last week. Do we create a process just for an internal candidate? And it looks like this, and these are the boxes we check. And or do we go the route of an internal and external process and check those boxes? I've not done that for this position.
Well, we're at the point now where we don't have an internal candidate. So the purpose of this meeting is to figure out a procedure to hire a city manager. Whether we need to decide whether we're going to do an external or an internal. Because we all got the same email. So we don't have an internal candidate. So the whole purpose of this meeting is probably not to lay blame, but to figure out, are we going to do an external or an internal? That was the purpose of this meeting on the procedure to hire a city manager because we don't have a candidate anymore.
We didn't have a process or procedure to hire a city manager.
We hadn't. Go ahead, Chief.
I believe we did have a process that we followed the process. I believe that not everybody felt the same way. And there's not a lot that each of us individually can do about that, but have our own opinion. But I believe the process was there, and I believe that the questions were asked. We were informed and we made decisions up to the point of the last meeting when it seemed that not everybody was on the same page. So that's how I see it, but
Does everyone agree then that we did follow a process?
I felt we followed a process. We may not have liked the process that it started when we went through Kaufman, but then we still agreed to do an internal process. I don't even think we were probably halfway through. We were just trying to give our candidate the approval that we had his back on the decision that he made, that he was going to make. Because I think, I don't want to speak for him, but if you don't have full commitment, why would I want to take a gamble? And I think that's what he was looking for, to just make that final commitment. Hey, I'm your guy.
I understand that, absolutely. And that is that kind of teeters more on the personal side of it, whereas I just am trying to be very objective, that are we following the rules?
I think that was pointed out quite clearly in the presentation for the internal candidate. And I think that was the model that we chose.
And so when I have a message from Karen from November that says that we might advertise again,
the word might?
and that's exactly what I said. When did we have an opportunity, if there was a might available, were we given an opportunity? Hey, folks, we're running down the steps. Here's the process we're following. At this point, we need to decide if we might put it out to anybody or not. And I don't recall having that discussion, and I'm not by any means saying that we needed to. I just want to make sure we're following the process.
Yes, I see.
I think within that last note, some of the things that we're feeling is maybe we should have put a check voice sooner than 6 months. Something that I've told many people is that my time in city council feels like this first year has me been learning the city cycle, budgets and things and so on. And then, kind of implementing all of the extra training and stuff that I've been given. And then it felt like the last 7 months personally has been, how do I apply that in the best way possible? And you hear, different voices in the community saying, show integrity. And that's what we all want to do. I feel like within also this last half year, the council, we've all learned in what areas we could be better. And now we're trying to adjust to, well, we have a view of what better is. So how do we acclimate to that? And me personally, I know that all the steps that we followed, we put the path and we're here. It's 6 months and we're checking in and this is what we said to do. But now we have this hyper mindset of, okay, well now I know a little more on what I can do. Am I doing that the right way with what I can do? And I hear all of us saying that none of us meant to, and I know this is a moot point at the moment, but none of us meant to discredit integrity or the honor of the city or any of the candidates or the process. We're just trying to make sure that we can execute the seats that we volunteer for as efficiently and as ethically and as passionately as possible. And now, knowing over the last few meetings, learning it takes a year to find a city manager is what's projected. And 8 months ago, 9 months ago, I didn't quite know that. I was a part of the committee to vet and look Prothman, and I had those meetings. I listened, but if I had heard it, I didn't register and I didn't sit on it. And so now I feel like there's that unease of, oh, I'm in a situation where I have to make a decision, but I'm trying to make this decision and make sure that all the steps I walked to get here were the right way to do things. To answer a question, to give it very clear, this is how I feel. I'm always thinking it's wonderful if we're gonna decide what is that process. Well, let's open it up internally. Let's, we're having this discussion in a public setting and we're obviously able to be voicing our different views on how to execute the right way of doing things And just to make sure that everyone in the community knows that we're being honorable and ethical and passionate. And so if nothing, unfortunately was to come out of an internal pool candidates opening, then I think if we're gonna decide a process, then we should open internal. And then if not, then we would just obviously have to decide to go through. But I feel that pressure just as much as everyone else to try to learn and how to do this and how to adjust, because we all sit here to try to be the voice of everyone in the city. And I don't shake my head in a dramatic way to just, but that's just it. And we we are all here because we love the town. I mean, I've only lived here for 6 years and I've been on council for 1 year and 7 months, and I was in love with the town, a couple years before I ran for council. So there's nothing wrong with that. And like, I don't judge anyone, or, for lack of better words, for trying to learn how to be better and execute better, and voicing how they can help the metaphorical car stay on the road as, best in the lines as it can, because that's what I want to do too.
Anybody else have anything to say?
The only thing I would have to say is I've got a lot of email copies here from like November of last year when we started this process. So, I mean, it's not like that Leslie didn't have a lot of questions then. And I think Rothman and I both, and if you remember, we asked Rothman to attend one of our meetings. And we said that those are confidential and that we will not share them with you as a council member. And I think that probably you still continue to get a lot of pressure from the community. And here we sit.
Could I ask a question? If we are tasked with hiring the new city manager, why wouldn't we be able to see the applicants? The pool of applicants? Why wouldn't that be in our purview for selection process?
I don't know, you have to call Rothman, guess, that is never, I mean, we've had all this discussion last year. You either didn't ask the question about the process, when we were going through it. And I realized that Leslie had a lot of questions that I think, I think we just need to get past this, decide if you're gonna go internally or externally, where you're gonna start, what you actually intend to do. This, everybody talking is not getting us down the road.
So can I ask Sharon another question?
Yes.
Sharon. Since we've already gone through Cropland one time, are you aware of other agencies or entities that could help us in the search for a candidate? And
I cannot make a recommendation.
Pardon? I'm sorry.
I cannot make a recommendation of, number one, I can't tell an entity how to spend their money, and hiring a consultant is almost giving direction on how to spend your money. There are other agencies such as Prothman that do this line of work. Karen could maybe even get different names from LOC. They may share that information. I cannot give that guidance because that would be favoring one organization over another, because those are private companies. But many entities go to these search companies to help them in their process, because it is a very large and cumbersome process. And the goal with hiring a third party is for them to help line out your process in a way that, clarifies the steps. So sometimes using an agency is good because it's a lot of work to do this. It's a lot of work. The other thing about doing this is I'm hearing a lot of internal versus external. There's nothing wrong with just doing a process and letting everybody and anybody who wants to apply. I mean, I've seen many processes where an entity does a recruitment and an internal applicant applies. I have seen entities, I just helped an entity that had a acting city manager, an interim city manager that was a department head, was in the interim role. They did a full-blown recruitment process. The interim applied and the interim ended up getting it, but they were part of the full recruitment process. So again, your process is at the pleasure of the city council. But once you do your process, you need to make sure you know how you are scoring your applications. What is the definitions of the scoring of your applications? Does an applicant, whether it be an internal or an external applicant, get veterans preference? You have to make sure you are giving that correctly at every step of the interview process. So again, that is why sometimes hiring a third party kind of helps with some of that. I would make sure you hire a third party if you are doing that they understand Oregon veterans preference law, because there are some agencies that, don't have that. I mean, some states that don't have that, or many states that don't have that. So you want to make sure you're hiring someone who understands Oregon law when it comes to that. But, there's so many different ways of doing it. And it really is the pleasure of the council as to how your process moves forward. Who you hire, how you interview, how you recruit, internal, external, do it all at one time. Those are all things that you as a collective body make a decision on in order to get to your hire, which is your city manager. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Sorry.
So does anybody else on the council have an idea of what they want to see happen?
Well, I was just gonna ask a motion, because there's a motion to
Turning down questions at this point. Are we done with questions?
well, we could always do the question in a motion.
Well, I move to open application for an internal and external candidate without outside source as a preliminary interview.
I second.
Us as the council.
I'll second. Questions? We have a question.
Do we have? What are the next steps thereafter? Should we have those in place before we start this recruitment process? We utilize some of the tools provided, we get to decide.
We would not get to decide. There was never the option that we would get to decide.
Well, I think we get what Leslie's trying to say by May is, do we want to do this application? Do we want to use that job description? Do we want to have these interview questions? Do we want to have a rating scale? How should?
We're getting ahead of the game.
Well, I
Just like
think
that, we need a procedure. Are we doing internal or external or whatever? That all comes after. That's what got us in trouble last week. We got the step after and we allowed ourselves to get caught up in where we do next week. We haven't even made a decision. That, in my opinion, is we can't think about that yet. We got to think about the procedure on how we do it and the maximum steps. So that's my opinion.
Well, I have worked in places where you're tweaking the interview questions at the end and you're deciding to toss this one out and put this one in, but you still have a standard rating system. You still have job description that you're posting, that part of your job description is what they are applying for.
Again, that's at the next step. We need to decide.
I don't think you can even open the job if you don't have a job description to the people that they're applying for.
Excuse me, I think you're out of order on that because I think she sent the email to us.
And that is.
The job description.
Since 2003. Is that something we want to reevaluate? Are we okay with that? Is that the job description we post?
But I think what Paul's trying to say to you is you need to make a motion, whether you're going to follow the external or the internal procedure, and this is the procedure we're gonna follow. Past that, then you get down in the minutia of, okay, now here, let's decide what the job description, what the timeline is, how the process works.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so I move to open application for internal and external candidates without an outside source as a preliminary interview. And I can explain why I feel that way if you want. I just don't know that it's worth the money that was spent on this problem. Who is familiar with Boardman as a city, I don't think they actually perhaps picked the right candidates for us. They may have been their candidates. And I think that we as a council look at some potential good candidates.
We have a motion in a second. We're still in question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the council willing to meet next week? I feel like these are just matters that, like we mentioned last week, just don't deserve long extensions of time between. And I don't say that to even or kind of stoke what my question is, but it just feels like long periods of time, it's just gonna be lost periods of time.
If we can.
It almost, I just don't want to be ahead of the game better. I understand what you're saying. But also, it's like the government to force an unfunded mandate, you know, we have to do this, but we have no resources to do it. I want to make sure that we are capable of doing whatever we make a motion to do. So if we want to follow what you presented to us, which makes sense, of internal or and external recruitment or internal review only, is that us, or is there a part of the staff who could potentially coordinate all of this? We collect applications and then there's a committee in place, et cetera. Is that what we are all willing to do if we don't have a third party?
And do we need to contact the lawyer to find out if we can be in executive session to review those applications? Or do we need to do that in open public forum? What, how does that look like? Because I think I'm uncomfortable looking at people's applications.
Do we have a motion and we have a second? Is there any more question? Okay, so we'll have a roll call of who's in favor or not in favor of the motion.
Councilor Wades.
Yes.
Councilor Cobbett. Yes. Councilor Diego.
Yes.
Councilor Pearson.
Yep.
Yes. So we have that in the minutes of the, we're going to go to that. Okay. So we have a regular scheduled meeting in August. This meeting is adjourned.
We're not going to answer those other questions.
No meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting is August 7th.